Holy Spirit, as you make your dwelling place within us, may you find the places where we have become dead and bring us back to life. May you search out the ways that we become lost, and may you help us find ourselves again. Amen. In our first reading this morning, Paul talks about how he and others of the early Christian community no longer see one another from a human point of view. They see one another from God's point of view. And he goes on to make sort of a technical argument, a theological argument about how this works and what impact it has. Now, if you are also a writer or have taken a writing class, you may have heard the difference between someone who tells and someone who shows in their text. And you're supposed to show, you're not supposed to tell. So if I'm writing, I wouldn't say the person became angry. I might say that their face reddened and their brows came together and their mouth was in a straight, flat line, something like that. Paul likes to tell. Paul will, at length, he'll tell you, this is what I mean, and these are the theological steps I'm taking, and here's my terminology. Jesus also tells sometimes, especially in the Gospel of John, Jesus really gets into telling. That's what John remembers, apparently. The stories that John collected. But Jesus likes to show. And the thing I like about parables is they don't tell, they show. Jesus could explain, the way that Paul is, about how to see people from a different point of view to these Pharisees who have such a problem with him. But instead he tells them 3 stories. And I'm going to focus on the third story, being rich and meaning and well-known to many of us. I'm assuming in kind of moment. If it isn't, I always think, if this is the first time you've encountered the story of the prodigal son, congratulations. This is great. It's like when you have a favorite movie that your friend has never seen, and you're like, oh, you are in for a treat. We're gonna watch this right now. Actually, this is a detour. Last night, Poppy discovered Toy Story. Remember? Yeah, right? She was like, there's a movie about toys? We're like, yes, there is. So, and here it is. And then, did you know there's Toy Story 2? She's like, oh. So, Toy Story 2. And then Pam's like, there's a third one. She's like, no way, but it's bedtime. Ah! Anyway, that feeling. If this is the first time you've encountered the prodigal son. There isn't a second prodigal son. I'm sorry, I'm just one. So Jesus, there's this problem with Jesus, is that he attracts sinners and tax collectors. And he doesn't just lure them in to then shame them and yell at them. Like they come in and then he invites himself over to their houses and he has meals with them and he spends time with them. And this is a problem on many levels. It's bad for his reputation as a traveling rabbi. In fact, it disqualifies him from being a rabbi. It's like malpractice. Every time he has a meal with sinners, with the unclean, he should have to then go ritually cleanse himself and repent before he can be a rabbi again. But this guy, he's a rabbi, he's a traveling preacher, and he just will not repent of this behavior. And the Pharisees and the scribes had this sneaking suspicion that Jesus isn't yelling at and shaming these sinners and tax collectors. Instead, he's maybe just sharing meals with them, which is, how could you do that? And they call him out on this. And it even comes up in his trial. It's one of the reasons people ultimately decide they're going to try to frame him and kill him. Because he eats meals with sinners and tax collectors, and he just won't stop. So Jesus, probably surrounded by sinners and tax collectors, as he often is, and other people who have come to hear him speak, is being harangued once again by the scribes and the Pharisees. And so it's like, all right, I'm not going to tell them, I'm going to show them. I'm going to tell some stories. So he tells a story about a lost sheep. And the sheep, of course, represents lost people and how those people are found. And he tells a story about a lost coin. And the coin, again, represents lost people and how all this effort goes into finding the lost coin. You forget the coins you have, and you look for the one you lost, because it's lost. But then he goes to a more interesting story, the story of the prodigal son. More interesting in a lot of ways, but one of them is that this story is about a person who gets lost, and in the story finds himself. And then decides to return to his father. His father didn't go out seeking him. He came back. He came to himself, it says in the text, and he comes back. And all of the people in Jesus' audience could find themselves in this story. Maybe not all. Many of the people in his audience could find themselves somewhere in this story. The younger son, it seems, is supposed to be the sinners and the tax collectors. And so Jesus presents the younger son as having this inheritance from his father, and he asked for his inheritance early. He's ambitious, whatever, he's going to go make something of himself. And so his father says, sure. Divides up what he has, gives what would fall to his son early. After a few days, his son packs up and travels to a distant land. And in that distant land, he uses up what he was given by his father in dissolute living. You can speculate what that means. He doesn't invest it well, put it that way. And so he loses what he was given in dissolute living, but that isn't even what brings him down. There's a famine in the land. And that's what really nails him. The food runs out, and he's now destitute, and he's desperate. And so he's looking for work, and it says in the text that no one will help him. And so he ends up working for this boss, who probably knows he's Jewish, but this boss sends him out to feed the pigs, just to add insult to injury. And so he ends up feeding these pods, like seed pods, to the pigs, wishing that he could share the slop with them, but no one will help him. And he ends up in this desperate situation, and he realizes, man, my dad's employees are looking better than this. Surely I could probably get a job, in the Bronze Age equivalent of a mailroom, right? Surely I could get some sort of entry-level position, and I'd be better off than I am here. The younger son, I think, is supposed to represent the sinners and the tax collectors. Very interesting thing about the younger son. It isn't the dissolute living that brings him down. We think of the prodigal son as like, oh, he goes, he wastes his money on prostitutes and comes slumping back to his father. No. He does possibly waste his money on prostitutes. That's what the older son assumes, having never heard his story. We know he blows the money, runs out. What brings him down is the famine, the economic collapse. That is what brings him down. He might have been okay. He could have found a job. He could have earned some money. But the famine brings him down. That's part one. And part two, the cruelty and callousness of other people is what brings him down. Because in the midst of this famine, when he's down to nothing, it says in the text, no one will help him. No one will give him any assistance or any charity. Maybe because he's a foreigner. He has a weird accent. He speaks a different language. We're not going to help him. Go back to where you came from, prodigal son. And so he ends up in this terrible job with this terrible boss who just makes him go feed the pigs. The worst job Jesus' audience could probably think of. I thought that was interesting. That even in my little thumbnail sketch of this story, I take the older son's interpretation of things without thinking about it. Speaking of whom, the older son blames his younger brother's failure on his dissolute living. He says he devoured his inheritance with prostitutes. That is vivid. The older son is a poet. You can't take that away from him. Like, he has a turn of phrase. That is a sick burn, right? The older son hasn't heard the story. He hears distant partying. He's like, what's going on? Well, your younger brother came back. And already the older son knows exactly what happened to that irreputable little jerk. I know what he did. He devoured his inheritance. He hasn't heard this. He wasn't told that at all. All he knows is his younger brother came back and there's a party. But he makes this accusation and we kind of absorb it. This makes me reflect on conversations I frequently have when talking about how people get into desperate circumstances, how people get into poverty, how people become homeless. And it is so often the assumption that there's some moral failing that led to this. And you can see this everywhere, from the law all the way down to how a charity functions. A good example. Various states have passed laws where you have to be drug tested to receive welfare. No one is talking about drug testing CEOs whose profitable corporations receive billions of dollars in government subsidies. Because we assume they're there because of their moral strength, and the poor are there because of their moral failings. We feel like we have to really police their behavior. Don't you spend that food stamp on lobster. Oh, God help you if you do. Don't you dare. And you have to make sure that you applied to at least 30 jobs this month to receive your welfare check. Because you better be working. We need to watch you. You, millionaire, billionaire, no problem. Here's all the resources you need. You're good. But you, poor person, oh, what did you do? Did you devour your inheritance with prostitutes? I think you did. We take the older son's side. So often and so reflexively, when you look at people's circumstances, it's much more like the younger son. You make some questionable decisions, sure. Who hasn't? But then something else happens that knocks you down, and then no one helps. And you don't have a community to fall back on, and you don't have family to help you, and there you are in the dirt at the bottom. In this story of the prodigal son, I found it very interesting. Jesus is clearly frustrated with the scribes and Pharisees. He calls them vipers in previous situations and has hard words for them. But even in this story, in telling the story of the older son who represents the Pharisees, the older son is also shown grace in this story. The story isn't just a story of shut up, older son, you judgmental jerk, and take the side of the younger son. The story doesn't do that. When the older son brings his concerns to his father shows him every grace and says, I love you. Everything I have is yours. You're in. You have all the things you had before. You have this life with me. I know. I appreciate you. You've done all the right things. You're right. But the father just kind of shrugs his hands and says, but hey, younger son, I thought he was dead. I thought he was gone and he's back. We have to celebrate. But even the Pharisees who were there eventually plotting Jesus' death, they may not be that angry yet. But even the Pharisees are shown grace. Through this story, Jesus says, I understand. You have been doing the work this whole time. You are faithful people. We just need to celebrate these other people who I'm going out and finding, who are finding themselves, and who maybe you could judge a little less harshly until you've heard their story and you've heard what it is that actually happened to them. And there's a sense in which the older son might even be taking his life for granted. His immediate response is bitterness that the younger son gets a party. I've never got a party. But here he is. He also never experienced a famine. He also never had a nasty boss make him go feed the pigs as a Jew. He gets to live with his dad. He gets to inherit the family business. Yes, he has to work, of course, but he has a good life that maybe he even takes for granted. All the things that he's given that his younger brother, yes, squandered some of them, but hasn't had. The father in the story, I think, of course, represents God. And in this case, Jesus acting on God's behalf in the way that God would like for us to act. The Father shows grace 2 times to his younger son. Once in giving him the freedom that he asked for and saying, here's your inheritance. Here's everything you would get if I died. Go do what you're going to do. You know, you're an adult man. Make your choices. And letting him go into a foreign country to do literally God knows what. And this thing's well. I hope he's okay. And then he shows him grace the second time. When he sees him coming down the road, there's a wonderful image of his dad like hitching up his robes and running down the road with his sandals flapping and waving his arms and hugging his son, who's trying to explain. He has his rehearsed speech. I know that I have sinned against God and against you, and I'm not worthy to poof, and he's just grabbing this hug. He gets a ring on his finger and a robe put on him, and he's brought back, and his dad's throwing a party before he can even get through his full rehearsed speech he had read. And then the father shows grace to the older son. When he's like, where's Junior? Like, we're having this party, where'd he go? Well, he's out sulking in the fields. And so his dad leaves the party and goes out and finds him and hears his concerns and doesn't scold him. You know, just hears the bitterness, the jealousy, and in return just shows love. You have all that I have. You're still my firstborn. You're still my son. I'm just throwing this party because your brother came back and I thought he was dead and he was lost to me. The father in this story is the gracious giver of gifts and the thrower of parties. That is his personality in this story. That's how God is presented in the story of the prodigal son. Gracious, giver of gifts, thrower of parties. He's also the only person in the whole story who's happy. I don't know if you noticed that. The older son is sullen and bitter. The younger son is ashamed and repentant. But the father is happy. He's so excited. He's trying to convince his sons to be happy. Like, stop apologizing in party. Stop sulking in party. So where are we in this story? Classic question. Because the purpose of this story is for the audience to locate ourselves somewhere within it. Maybe more like the younger son. Ambitious. Maybe you step out before you really thought things through. Made some questionable choices. Fill in the blanks of what questionable might mean. It's as vague as dissolute living, intentionally. Dissolute living can mean a lot of things. In addition, some genuine bad luck. Bad things happen that you could not have foreseen, that knocked you down. And then bad bosses. Anyone ever have a bad boss? I also had a bad boss. So bad luck, bad bosses, and no community to fall back on. When you're there in the pigsty, feeding the pigs pods, there's nobody there to come get you. There's nobody there to come help. There's nobody giving you anything until you help yourself. Or more like the older son, perhaps. The faithful, the hard worker, the trustworthy, the one in the background who's actually getting things done while everyone else is having a good time. The person who's reliable, who probably takes great pride in being that reliable person. Who also maybe feels a little bitterness when people who don't deserve something receive it. When people get what they have not worked to earn. Maybe even taking for granted the position that we're in. Insulated from famine. Surrounded by a community that's there for us. And not noticing that until we see someone who doesn't have those things. In this story, ultimately, it doesn't matter if you see yourself as more of the older son or more of the younger son. Because in the story, we are all called to be like the Father. Wherever you find yourself, that is where we are supposed to be headed. Or in the way Paul might say it, to see with God's point of view, not counting trespasses against us and trespasses against one another. Showing grace and generosity to people who wander, who make mistakes. When we meet them, not presuming fault, but presuming value and dignity in those people. Showing grace and generosity to the faithful workers. Sharing and honoring what they have done. Rewarding them for it. Making sure they feel like they're part of the community and appreciated. And also listening to that occasional bitterness without judgment. Did the so-called sinners hear this story? Did they hear themselves in the younger son, being welcomed home despite what they had done, moving from death to life, from lostness to foundness and community? Did the Pharisees hear themselves in this story, honored for the good work that they have done, but also a little bit called out for the presumption that they make about those who wander, that it's a moral failing, and sometimes the bitterness that they feel, and people who haven't been faithful are treated with grace? Either way, in this story, they and we are being called to be like the Father, showing grace, giving gifts, and yes,